Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Nikki Otten. I am the Associate Curator of Prints and Drawings here at the Milwaukee Art Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Expert Series talk with Ericka Walker this afternoon. I would like to take a moment before we start to thank the sponsors who made the exhibition possible. The presenting sponsors are James and Susie Wickman and the Wilhelms Family Foundation. Leadership sponsorship was provided by the Milwaukee Art Museum's Friends of Art, and contributing sponsors are Russ Jankowski, Catherine and Sanford Mallon, and the Milwaukee Art Museum's Print Forum. I would also like to thank the Milwaukee Art Museum's 2022 Visionaries. And with that, I'm honored to introduce our guest, Ericka Walker. She is a visual artist and educator who grew up in Hartford, Wisconsin, and she now teaches and works in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, where she is the Associate Professor of Art at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. As you will soon see, Walker's practice operates on graphic art and particularly propaganda posters from the turn of the 20th century. She creates contemporary prints and murals that subvert nostalgia in order to address questions about colonialism, nation building, warfare, and agriculture. Walker holds a Master of Fine Arts from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville and a bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her work has been included in numerous national and international exhibitions, most recently the Megalo Print Gallery in Canberra, Australia, the Hilliard Art Museum in Lafayette, Louisiana, and the Kelowna Art Gallery in British Columbia, Canada. Her work is in many public and private collections, and she has been the recipient of numerous awards. And among the most recent honors she has received are the grand prize at the 2018 Okanagan Print Triennial in Kelowna, British Columbia, and it was just announced a few days ago that she is receiving the 2023 Southern Graphics Council International Mid-Career Printmaker Award. So, and she'll tell you a lot more herself, so please join me in welcoming Ericka. All right. So we're having a conversation between the two of us, so I think I'll just start out by giving you all a little bit more background about the gift of these posters, the exhibition, and the commission that we worked with Ericka on. So the exhibition is drawn from a gift of more than 600 posters by Jules Chéret that were donated to the museum by local collectors James and Susie Wickman. You can see them there in their former home on Newberry Boulevard with one of the posters very prominently displayed. So they first started collecting his work in 1983, and they were really drawn to the joy and liveliness of some of the female figures in Chéret's work, and they decided to make that their collecting passion and went on to build the largest collection in the United States. So to celebrate that gift, we put together an exhibition that features 105 of the posters that they donated. So the exhibition speaks to Chéret's role in transforming the poster from a commercial product into an art in its own right, and it's also meant to celebrate the gift of these posters. There's also another theme that has to do with ephemerality and how these posters weren't meant to last in any way. So you can see that if this painting is featured in the exhibition, and it gives a good example of what happened to these posters once they were in the street for a couple of days. So the ones on the right are starting to peel off the wall, they're fading, they're tearing, and that's what happened to these works. And I was very disappointed that I couldn't replicate that effect in the gallery with, with the gift of the Wickman's posters. So that was some of the impetus for inviting Ericka to create a contemporary poster for us that we could kind of do with what we wished, with her permission. So we invited her to create a Chéret-inspired poster that we could paste up in the walls of the gallery and also around Milwaukee, so it could get rained on, torn down, that kind of thing. So this is the design Ericka came up with for us, and it's on display in the first gallery of the exhibition. All right, so with that background laid, Ericka, I'm wondering if you could please tell us a little bit more about your regular artistic practice and the kind of work you normally make.
You bet. Thanks, Nikki. Thanks for that introduction. And I will tell you about my practice. But first, just a big thank you to the Wickmans wherever they are in the world. This is an incredible collection of Chéret's work. It's probably one of the largest collections in North America, I would imagine. Yeah, the largest. I've seen it in person a couple times in the archive here outside of this exhibition. And as someone who makes lithographs, it's stunning. It's a really important piece of culture, of the history of graphic arts in Europe and North America. And to be invited to do this piece was just such an honor. And it's really lovely to be here. I'm from Wisconsin. I'm a Wisconsin native. I know I'm somewhere up in Canada, but to be here at this museum, speaking to you all, I see friends, family, colleagues, and a lot of faces I don't know, and that's a perfect audience in my estimation. So I make posters. I make lithographic posters. I should put that in air quotes, because they don't really function like posters. So, oh, I have to do that now. Not enough hands. So this is indicative of my practice for the last, I guess, 10 years or so, which is the cutoff for being mid-career, apparently. I still feel really early in my career, but so what I'm doing with this work, or what I'm attempting to do, is invoke 20th century propaganda, particularly from World War I, World War II era, and I'm doing that in service of, I'm attempting to create questions and critical thinking around the difficulties and complexity of honoring heritage or ideas of progress. I'm hoping that this work kind of functions to confuse people, but not, not the kind of confusion that so many of us sometimes come to contemporary art with, like, what am I missing? But I'm hoping I can draw people in with the seduction of drawing and lithography, so that you can enjoy those questions with me. I have notes. I'm so overly prepared for everything I do, and I'm not apologetic about it anymore. That's just who I am. I feel like I'm in good company with Nikki, like kind of rigorous in what we do. So the work, I ran across the philosophies of Jacques Ellul a number of years ago. Jacques Ellul was a French philosopher who identified two types of propaganda. The first, integration propaganda, which serves the purpose of trying to get people to adjust themselves to desired patterns or ways of thinking. And then the second, agitation propaganda, which serves the purpose of inciting dissension or rebellion. And in between integration and agitation, persuasion can't really exist. It's this sort of absurdist space, or an odd liminal space, where the poster can't really do its job. So I'm crippling the poster, in hopes of kind of inciting that critical thinking. Yeah. So this has gone on for a couple years. It's a fairly newish piece. And I'm hoping that this is a platform to explore new meaning, not just for the viewers, but for me as well. This work is an inroad for me to learn about the pieces of my history, the history of my people, and what my ancestors have accomplished on this continent, for good or for ill. And, so the themes that show up a lot in the work, agriculture, resource extraction, the military-industrial complex is a big one, and we can see these things, the way that the stories have come to me, or at least came to me in my young age, and the way that propaganda brings these industries to us, is we're to see these as noble pursuits, job creators, economically stimulating. But I think we also know that these industries have created some of the worst problems for all of humankind, and are gross violations of the environment and the people who rely on it. So I'm exploring that tension between this little bit of reverence for the ingenuity that created these industries, and awe, but also this, I guess, shame or grief that comes from accepting their place in our world. So, yeah. Also, the oversimplification of really complex issues, that's what propaganda does. That's when it functions best, is if it can package us something, very simple, very clear, but these are very complicated industries and questions that I'm asking. So there's this real problem of oversimplification that I think if I can oversimplify in the posters that I make, I can draw attention to the problematics of that. So, and maybe if the viewer can see some of that tension or that little spark of confusion, that ping-ponging, like, what is being sold to me here? What am I supposed to get? What's the message? And then realize there isn't one. Am I being implicated? Is my patriotism the appropriate response to this work? And maybe if that can be evoked, then hence the thinking. Watch me put down my notes awkwardly. So as a graduate student, we pasted a bunch of these works back in, 2009. I was constantly traveling back and forth between Knoxville and, Madison, wherever you were living at the time. And so I was often in Kansas City, I was in St. Louis, I was in Louisville, and I would post these up in public and sometimes just sort of sit back and watch people's responses. And when the work is in a gallery, we come to a gallery expecting to hear some critical, or to like, we're supposed to think critically in a gallery. We're supposed to, this is an artist, so I can imagine that maybe this is an anti-war piece. But if you take them out of that context, then they become something else. There's a neutrality to that. So I would watch people, on the street walk past these posters and kind of like do this. I love that head tilt. Like, what am I looking at? And I realized, well, that's a really important way to engage with people, or that at least is fun for me. To watch that. And I think, social media then showed me that, oh yeah, people were really perplexed by this and kind of, seduced or having fun with it a bit. I don't know if you can see any of the text. Yeah, you can read that. But like, yeah, wow, what is this about? You never know what evil is lurking in these bean fields. And so I realized that, as democratic an art form as printmaking can be. So we have multiples. We can make 5 of a thing, 100 of a thing. These can be disseminated. Obviously, in Chéret's work, you see this dissemination was everything. Murals are an incredibly democratic art form. They meet people where they are. I wanted to do that. I set about to find a barn. Also, the barn is a mural, especially in a rural area. This is the platform similarly to these 20th century propaganda prints that I'm talking about. This is an advertisement meant to just present a simplified message, to sell a message. And finding a barn has been a challenge. I'm still in the market for barns in Wisconsin. If any of you have any leads, I'd like to talk to you afterwards. But I did have some luck in Nova Scotia. So in the agricultural valley where I live, there's been some really, really gracious farmers that I've developed really excellent relationships with. And this work has done more than I can ever imagine. What happens in rural areas is really important to all of us. Agriculture feeds the entire population of the world. There are some really serious issues, contemporary issues around the health of soil and how many harvests we have left on this planet. But I grew up in a rural spot. I have a responsibility to speak to my people, to engage with my people. And what happened in these locations while I was working on the murals was really, it was a lot more. I thought I would just go and kind of do this mural and leave it up and have that head tilt happen. But what happened is it became a social space, like a gathering space. People would stop all the time and ask us, like, what are you doing? What does this mean? And we would start sharing stories about, how are you producing crops? That people would tell me about the history of their family in this land, the kinds of changes that they've made to the agricultural practices in order to keep up with the market. And then I would share with them, like, well, there's not one meeting. You're not missing anything. A lot of contemporary artists want you to make up the meaning. That's what we're up to. So what do you think it means? And then these great connections were made. So more of this. More posters, more of this. That's what I want. This piece in particular is for me, was about exploring some of those issues around soil conservation and the health of the soil. Not a sexy topic, but really important. Just an ongoing series in progress, a little bit of a diversion from the poster, but I wanted to squeak this in here. I'm exploring frequently, like I've said, those destructive and generative birthrights. These are explosions, particularly this is about the destructive birthrights that myself and my children have been born into. And so I'm now that I'm a little bit more interested in having other people print lithographically for me, and you helped with that, I'm getting into woodcuts again. And for those of you that don't know, it's a really, we're talking about really sharp tools, a piece of plywood, and just some really physical, really meditative carving and cutting, very different from drawing. So is there space for terror and beauty to exist at once? Is that question worth asking? Is the sublime something that can help folks with ancestry like mine grieve over the things that we've done? And I'm not talking about guilt or shame. I find white guilt is a particularly unproductive thing for us to rest on, but I think grief is very different. If we can feel grief around the realities of our lineage and our parentage, when you experience grief, you can move on to do productive things, ideally. So we'll see where this one goes. And then also in progress is this really special body of work, very personal. If you noticed in the posters, there's no representations in the earlier posters of people directly involved in military conflicts. I don't picture veterans. I'm not comfortable with that. I don't picture medics. I don't picture refugees. That has never felt comfortable for me to touch. But my father was involved in the Vietnam conflict. And he has a collection of old photographs. So I'm using his photographs and his time in the service, my connection with his Navy buddies, to start exploring how the male body and what is traditionally male labor, how that's been used and kind of used to sell this idea of both masculinity, but also selling us that nobility, the nobility of male labor, and how that has failed us, perhaps. So I should back up and mention, because we'll talk about landfall a little bit later. This is this piece first showed up here at this museum in 2019, and it's 7 foot tall, the largest lithograph that I could have never imagined myself making anything larger than 4 feet tall. But thanks to Jack Lemmon, the mastermind behind Landfall Press, we got together and made this 7 foot tall lithograph, which was the first of this series that I'm calling Yankee Station, which is the space in the South China Sea where the aircraft my dad was stationed on was. So
And that poster was outside the wall of the exhibition, if you saw that one, so that it may look familiar to you if you came to the Landfall Press exhibition.
Yeah. So there's some text in there from from propaganda from the Vietnam era, from the state-sponsored, I believe it was a recruitment slogan. And then the text on the bottom, some people waved, some didn't, was from some of my dad's writings about leaving the San Francisco harbor and witnessing, people watching this behemoth of a ship leave the harbor. And some people waved and some didn't. So what I've been doing with this series is pasting pasting other text on top of what appears to be original text, and kind of suggesting that, yeah, history isn't immutable. We can revise, we can revisit, we can recontextualize, and we ought to. These histories don't do very well if we just leave them in peace. So the text in the original layers, or what, the underneath layers is, again, that state-sponsored propaganda, that integration propaganda. And then the words on top are words from the more human side of the conflict, words of my father's, things that his Navy buddies said to me, testimony from the Winter Soldier investigations, journalists, etc. So that's it, and that's what I'm up to in my studio practice. Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's really interesting that you're talking about the way that you get the kind of incredulous head turn with that confusion of meaning in the works that you make, because I think that's the same thing Chéret was going for, but with a more straightforward message. So he came up with all these specific colors and compositional techniques to make sure that the people walking down the streets in Paris who were very, very busy would stop and look at the advertising message. So it's interesting that he wants to sell you something very straightforward, but still wants you to stop and look at it, but you're doing the opposite, and it has the same physical effect on people.
I never thought of that. Right on.
Yeah. But I think we should move into talking about the actual commission poster. So when I first contacted you about the project, I asked you to make a Chéret-inspired poster. So it would be great to hear more about how you chose which elements of Chéret's work to incorporate into the poster, and how you balanced that with your own artistic practice.
Yeah, that was the biggest challenge before any drawings or any sketches. I just had to familiarize myself with the collection, and I had seen we had an archive visit during that Landfall exhibition in 2019. Before going into the Landfall exhibition, when it opened, Jack Lemmon, this master printer I mentioned, got Nikki to pull, God, so many beautiful Chéret works. I was very familiar with his with his career, because I do teach a little bit of print history to my students, and he is the father of the modern poster. The poster is an art form. And then we had another archive visit recently, and there's a lot of those 600 prints that Nikki mentioned that the Wickmans donated are available to look at in the digital archive. So that's what I did for weeks. I just sat down and went through that digital archive, and from my photographs on my phone of the archive visits that we did, and really just to find favorites, and just to sort of go with my gut and instinct, like, oh, I love this one. I don't know why. I'm going to put it over here in this folder on my desktop. This is, that should tell me something about, what I'm going to make. And I noticed pretty clearly that, okay, there's these works, like the ones on the left from his, early career, early poster work, and then the images on the right, kind of his later work, and there's plenty in the middle as well, but I had to decide, am I going to evoke the early work? Am I going to find some place in the middle? Am I going to go with this late work? This is my favorite on the left. And I didn't want to attempt to emulate Chéret and all his late career glory. That wasn't really an interest of mine. I don't know, it didn't feel like in the spirit of what you were asking me to do. Like, you wanted me to do my thing, to make something, and you gave me no parameters, which was really great. Like, make your art, but Chéret. So what are you going to do with that? And so then once I found those favorites, and I knew I wanted to land somewhere in the middle of his early work and his later work, then it got really granular. Like, do I outline? How am I going to use the outline? Because the outline features pretty heavily in some of the earlier work. The drawing in these earlier works is pretty tight. If you're in the exhibition later today, notice that. The way that he's rendering figures and forms, it's tight, it's careful, it's considered, it's beautiful. But then in this later work, the energy present in the figures, the broken outline, the way that this contemporary moment of modernity is starting to infuse his work becomes really exciting. So what am I going to do? Like I said, I wanted to land somewhere in the middle. And in the exhibition, you can kind of see these pieces where, there's still an element of this older style of typography, this very much adheres to the grid that would have been used by typesetters who were making all of the graphic work and posters up until this time. And his, I'll talk about that later. Oops. So I landed on this Bernard Bidot piece. Didn't realize that this poster on the left is actually about printed matter and the distribution of printed matter. It's a printing house that he's making an advertisement for. I just like that strong diagonal. I'm a sucker for a bisecting diagonal. And I love that there's both the rectangle on the bottom. I can put all of the text about the museum, the dates, the title of the exhibition, so it had to have both. It had to have the curved text. It had to have the information about the exhibition, and sort of be in between those two styles, so that I could, squeeze myself into there. And there had to be figures. Would they be dapper men? Would they be these charets, these dancing women in yellow dresses? There had to be cherubic children, definitely. And there are quite a lot in his work, and they're cute and chubby and sometimes a little sinister, like my own children. I have 2 curly-haired blonde children, so I used the eldest as my model. Yeah, someday he'll get a kick out of that. Still doesn't understand what I'm doing. At some point he's gonna be like, oh, Mom draws, really cool. And the clown, a very revered figure in Parisian culture. Performers generally, before televisions, had such a prominent place in European life, especially in France. And I think the exhibition does a really excellent job of showcasing what was going on in Paris, what people were. That piece of the man who made his livelihood catching cannonballs that were fired at his abdomen.
Holtzum the Cannon Man. So.
There's some really wild stories that, if you haven't done a tour with Nikki, I hope you're doing at least one more before it closes.
Yes, I have one more at noon on October 13th.
Yeah.
So, and also I recorded an audio guide. So there are 20 stops that I recorded and 4 from the Wickmans, and that's accessible on your phone. So it's mam.org/guide. So you can listen to it as you're falling asleep at night if you so desire.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. 2022, I love this. For me, it had to be a clown. I featured my children, so I have a husband who is maybe this guy. Don't tell him that. What was also important to me was to make a flexible image. I wanted to be able to make the piece that included the information about the exhibition and the dates, something that we could use for advertising when we would, wheat paste around the city, and then one where I could explore text and language, historic language in the way that I like to explore that in my studio practice. So working in that flexibility, the way that Chéret did. What isn't pictured here on the left is this Musée Grévin. That piece was one of the first, I think, that he also printed as he was really coming into his own as an artist. So making that piece to function really well without any text. That's the piece that's in the Wickman's home.
Yes, yeah. So the version without text on it is the one we saw in the slide of the Wickmans in their home. So he started making posters without the advertising message around 1890 as he was starting to earn more of an artistic reputation, not just a commercial one. So these all have the advertising text on it, but different texts for different occasions, different entertainments. But eventually he would make the same image with no text on it for collectors and connoisseurs who wanted to buy his work in galleries and things like that.
Yeah, they're beautiful. So here you can see, that red block of of open space gave me a bit of space and flexibility to to play around with some of that language, but then also to advertise the exhibition. Interestingly enough, though, I prefer the one on the right that advertises the exhibition, and I feel like I really landed in the middle in a good way. Sorry about that formatting error there. So I think what's really interesting about the exhibition and is really evident when you look at the progression of Chéret's work is, like I said, that grid that the text is very beholden to. And all of Chéret's contemporaries were very much, even though they were working lithographically, which meant they could do whatever they wanted with the text. They could make it curvy and swirly and interact with the figure. But it took a couple decades to, for folks to figure that out. It took Chéret for folks to figure that out because he really started to get creative with the text. I don't know why I'm doing this when it's right here. There's a thing that people do when they give talks. I'd like to see it big. And so then the other question was, do I do that gradation in the background in these early works? I love that we call it sometimes a rainbow roll or a split fountain. In French, it's dégradé. Or do I do these clouds, what I call them nebulous blobs, or washes in the background, and you see that start to show up in the later work. And this is what I do with all of my work, and it almost feels too vulnerable and embarrassing to show you all, but did these digital mock-ups. They're really clunky. They're just for me to squint at. When I'm making decisions, I squint at my screen and I move figures around, I move text around. I have another image of that somewhere in this slide presentation. But yeah, the dégradé or the blobby wash. Big decision for me. And then you look closely at those nebulous blobby washes. It was a really great opportunity to explore overlapping textures, mark making, color. And I wanted to use this piece to just keep flexing some litho chops and to get comfortable with with the medium in the way that Chéret would have used it. So here's just another kind of awkward progression of my thinking about the piece. And there's probably 50 more, but for the slide, it was just this, these were kind of the definitive ones or the departures. Yeah. Lithography.
Yeah, I know we have a lot of printmakers in the audience, but for people who aren't, it might be a good time to explain how lithography works. Mm-hmm. So I'll take a stab at it, Ericka, and you can supplement if I miss anything. Mm-hmm. But I do a very pared down version because it is very technically crazy. So the way I explain it normally is that it's based on the idea that oil and water repel each other. So in Chéret's time, it would have been done on a prepared slab of limestone, and the artist will draw on the stone with a greasy crayon. Then when they're done, the printer will chemically process the stone, and that makes the area that the artist drew on more receptive to grease, and the area that was blank becomes more receptive to water. Then you put a film of water on the stone, roll it up with greasy ink, and the area that was processed to become more attracted to water absorbs the water and repels the ink. The area that the person drew on with the greasy crayon absorbs the greasy, or attracts the greasy ink and repels the water. You put a piece of paper on it, run it through the press under high pressure, you have your image on the other side, and it's a mirror image of what was on the stone. So all that text is backwards. When you're working on the stone, you have to write everything backwards. So let me know if there's anything that I missed.
I thought that was perfect.
Okay.
Was that good? That was good.
Yeah. I know there's a lot that happens in the chemical processing, and I just breeze through all of that because I feel like just getting the basics is enough for...
I don't think they need to know about the chemistry.
Right.
The surface of the stone actually chemically changes. It becomes altered, that top 32nd of an inch.
Yeah, it totally blows my mind. It is magic.
It is.
It's magic.
It's alchemy. It's really pretty. It's wild.
Yeah, but in Chéret's time, they were using these mechanical presses, which you can see in the image. So this is not Chéret's press, but it's one that was around at the same time. And you can see just how big these presses were that they were printing on. So I think most people today use hand presses where you hand crank the press. And there aren't many of these steam-powered presses around anymore, but that's what Chéret would have been using in the 19th century.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I should say that in our printmaking studios, us artists use the hand-cranked presses and these lithographic slabs of Bavarian limestone. But then in the industry, which is what a lot of newspapers and printed material are still printed with, these steam-powered presses evolved into these Heidelbergs that take up rooms this size, and are printing thousands of sheets a minute. So we're still doing lithos today on the stones in this really old-fashioned way, but also in our printed matter. Yeah. And so there's just a quite historic image of the quarry where these stones are quarried from, in the Sollenhofen quarry in Bavaria in Germany, and they're still quarrying lithographic stones today. They're used really heavily in fancy interiors. The limestone. And there's just an image of what a drawing on a stone would have looked like. And yeah, we would have used a stone for this project, but working on getting onto one of those presses that you see here, since there is one operational in Santa Fe at the Landfall, now Blackrock shop, we thought it would be really appropriate to get this piece for the exhibition printed on one of these presses.
And Landfall, we have the Landfall Press Archive here at the museum. So that was we were celebrating the 50th anniversary of Landfall in 2019 when we did that exhibition. So the changeover happened with Jack Lemmon retiring in 2020. So he turned over the workshop and all of the presses and equipment to his master printer, Steve Campbell, and they're now operating the same press under the name Blackrock Editions. So if any of this looks familiar to you from the Landfall exhibition, that's why.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, I also forgot to mention that the litho process we described is how you make one color of a lithograph, and then you have to make a new stone for every color that you want to print. So I think that's part of what these images are for, where Ericka is showing all of the different color separations that she had to make for this poster.
Yeah, which is, for those of you that don't know lithography, hopefully one of the more mind-blowing pieces bits of information to bring to your admiration of Chéret's work is that each color you see would have had its own stone, would have been inked up in yellow or in red. So not only is he drawing in this beautiful, masterful way, but he's also then composing all of the colors separately as separate drawings. And since I didn't have weeks to spend at Blackrock to do those separations, because I'm not as good as Chéret, it would have taken me weeks. So we did them on plates. And so while as lithography was developing and becoming a bit more efficient, it was figured out that you could use aluminum plates to do a similar thing, not the same thing as stones, but a similar thing with zinc plates and then eventually aluminum plates. And then eventually those aluminum plates can be photosensitized. So what I did is I drew on these clear, translucent, kind of textured films in order to complete these color separations for the piece. So that's what you're seeing here. The top film is kind of being peeled away in the image on the left to see the sandwich of those color separations, those clear films together. And it'll make more sense here in a second. So in the image on the far left, the light blue film is on top. And so you can see the other films underneath kind of coming through. I didn't bring my progressive proofs. Shoot.
That's okay.
They're in the parking lot. And then you see the yellow film on top. That's all the information for yellow. And then red and dark blue. And so on. You can ask more questions, so we can always go back to that slide later. Slide later.
Yeah, and this is a video of Ericka's poster being printed at Blackrock. So we see Jack Lemmon feeding the paper into the press. This is a direct press rather than offset because the plate moves back and forth in that press bed, and it makes direct contact with the paper that's coming down off of the cylinder, and it's coming out the other side. So when I was working on the landfall press exhibition, I went to landfall and worked with Jack a little bit and talked to him about printmaking. And one thing that he and Steve were telling me is that this type of press requires a lot more transparent ink than the hand presses do. So we thought it would be great to work with BlackRock again to print this poster on a 19th century press, similar to what Chéret would have used. So we're really glad that it worked out that way. But I'm wondering, when we were talking about printing the poster at BlackRock on this press, did that affect how you thought about it? Because of the more transparent inks and some of the properties of printing on that machine?
Definitely. Originally, I was wondering if we could print it at the shop, at our studio at NASCAT, because we have so many wonderful color stones, so many wonderful lithographic stones, and we could have gotten a little bit bigger size, but that fit with BlackRock made so much sense, and it meant we could print really large edition as well. Well, really large, meaning like 300, not thousands, but for a lithograph, 300s, that's a lot. So, in talking on the phone with who is now my good friend Steve and with Jack Lemon, just asking them a little bit about some of the techniques Chéret would have used, and also when I was not sure whether to do that dégradé in the background or the nebulous blob, Steve, as an excellent printer as he is, was like, you make your art, you do your thing, but just for the record, these presses don't really do well with flats. So for those of you who make prints in the audience, a flat can be a very elusive thing to do in a lithograph. And by flat, I mean the large color areas that don't have a lot of drawing in them, don't have a lot of information, other than just printing that big chunk of color. And what happens often, whether you're printing by hand or using a foran, you get these roller marks, and you can kind of see them in these images. The flat's not perfectly flat. So, of course, someone like Steve Campbell, who trained his whole life and makes his business out of printing impeccably, not so comfortable with that. So he's like, just so you know, we don't really like that. Yeah. But you do your art.
On the archive visit, I remember him looking at some of the flats in these Chéret posters, and he said, "Oh, they just didn't care. Like, this is it's not perfect," and that was okay. But he hasn't adopted that into his own thinking about printing, I guess.
No, they can't. But yeah, Chéret didn't care. I was hoping but then there's that authenticity. Then they'll look like old prints, but. Again, he let me do my own thing and left it up to me. But again, if you see the exhibition today, you can notice a lot of these artifacts of what we would now call bad printing. But again, these had to go up in days and weeks, and folks on the street don't care about that. But I went with the nebulous, washy blob, cloud. I think they're striking, they're beautiful. I imagine that a lot of folks who go through the exhibition aren't paying attention to those. They're not meant to be paid attention to. They're just meant, to add this great energy to these performers. But lithographically, at least, this was a good place for me to loosen up a bit. I tend to really tighten up, and what's so amazing about lithography, and one of the reasons it changed advertising and the language of persuasion so much, was that departure from the grid, but also this direct drawing that was possible. So before, you used to have to pay engravers, people who were trained to do, engraving, whether it was relief or metal engraving, and the images, they're incredible to look at, but can be quite static. You can bring in an artist who's never made a print before in their life and say, this is your drawing utensil, here's a stone, and you can make an autographic mark, a mark that's truly your own. I think it turned out well. There will be more blobs in my future. Yeah. I think, yeah, I think that's the transparent thing is also not. The transparent ink has never been my jam because it's harder to print and because I don't consider myself, I work with litho, I'm not a lithographer, Ina. The transparent color also uncomfortable for me, but I knew that that's what we were going to be doing. And Jack had been pushing me in our work prior to think about, like, you can get 8, 15, 20 colors out of a lithograph if you let some of those primary colors mash together, overlap with one another. Blue and yellow make green. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I know you collaborated with Black Rock Editions on this commission in particular, but do you often collaborate with print workshops or people who, you've said you don't consider yourself a lithographer, so do you work with people who would consider themselves lithographers, or what's your background with collaborative printmaking?
Yeah, it's a funny one, and it's a different one. I feel like we did collaborate a little bit. I feel like the time I spent with you in the archive, the time I spent even reading some of your essays, and just knowing what some of your favorites were, the way that you think about Chéret and how you understand how important his work was historically really seeped into the way that I think. So you're also my collaborative partner. But I have worked collaboratively with printers, and it's not a typical arrangement for someone like myself who is like a self-publisher. I print my own work. It's never something that I imagined happening, and a lot of that, it has to do with the way collaborative printers generally work. A lot of the times they're hooked up with these real blue chip artists from the New York or LA scene who are, have really intense, gallery representation, who are, internationally famous. Like I could, I've done some international things, but I'm not like Derek Adams. It's not a great fit sometimes because I know a lot about how to make a print, and sometimes that really gets in the way when you work with a collaborative printer. So this is Jill Graham on the left. She's a Tamarind Trainmaster printer. Tamarind is one of the only facilities in the world that trains lithographers, and it's a very rigorous type of training. And that's why I don't call myself a lithographer, because I can't touch what she knows, what Jack knows, what Steve knows. But I did get the chance to work with both of them, actually at the same time. It was just this interesting convergence of events in my career. And Jill and I started working together I'm just going to skip over this, a couple weeks before I started working with Jack. And because she was a friend also, thank goodness, she could be really frank with me and really honest. And I think that's a collaborative printer's job too. Like, they have to deliver everything. And she encouraged me, forget what you know about lithography, bring me what you want. What do you want to print? What do you want to make? Let me do that dirty work. And I think that's what's so fascinating about what Steve Campbell and Jack Lemmon and Jill Graham have to do, is they have to make lithography clear enough for the artist to understand what they can do without burdening them with all the technical stuff. And that's a really interesting line to tread. And so she really, really encouraged me during this piece that we made together for the, she was working on a portfolio funded by the Canada Council for the Arts that was kind of reopening the NASCAD lithography workshop, which was a massively important piece of North American art history in the 60s and the 70s. And so we kind of opened it up again because Jill Graham is working at NASCAD. And so she worked with 8 artists, myself included, and so we sat down to work together, and what I learned through looking at the prints that she had made for other artists in the past was, I want some of that texture. I want some of that yummy, sexy stuff you're doing with these backgrounds. I think it's funny, a lot of the times printers, at least most of the ones I know, they want artists to get on a stone. Like, they're often really attracted to somebody who can draw. But I wanted to go in a different direction. and so I think she was hoping I would draw on a stone. Jack was interested in working with me because I draw. He wanted to get me on some big stones, but it's kind of hard to see in this image. But what I came away with from that relationship with Jill was I want to begin to let some of the layering possible and the lithographic mark making possible do some of the seductive work. And that wasn't something I was comfortable doing on my own. And that's where I think I was just listening to Adrienne Herman talk about her relationship with Andy Rubin recently, and how if some of us printmakers will, take that opportunity to work with somebody else who can bother themselves with all these technical details, that can free us up to think about our medium differently, and that's important sometimes. So when Jack and I had made that 7-foot tall piece together, and then when that exhibition opened here at the museum and we went to see the archive, he kept pointing to these, to the Chéret works on the table and saying, "Ericka, look how, there's only 4 colors here. There's only 3 colors here. Look what's possible. We've got to get you doing that. We got to get you doing that." I'm like, I thought you were retiring. But he had one more piece up his sleeve for me, which is still, it was put on hold because of the pandemic. I'm really disappointed, but maybe we'll get to it someday. Because he's clearly, you saw him in that video, he's still printing. Thomas, tell him to get working on that one with me. What else was I going to say about that? Collaborative printers, they're magicians. It's rare to find somebody these days, I think, who's so masterful at a craft that it's a beauty to behold them working. And that's something I've really enjoyed about watching Jill work, watching Jack work, seeing the Chéret exhibition. And I'll talk about some of the details of what I noticed about Chéret's work. Oh, there's us at the archive. This is our archive visit. Developing those kind of skills. We can't get our undergraduates to this level, even in graduate school, even if it's a 3-year program. We're so often straddling the line between getting students to work with ideas and training them to be, decent enough printers to do the job, but being able to really focus on learning a craft and developing a craft over the course of your life. I think that's a really important part of humanity that, it's just getting rarer and rarer to find. And as funding in the humanities gets cut, less and less common. But there's a really important kernel of something that we lose when we aren't pursuing these things as people. So I still carve out a lot of time in my studio, and it's really hard. With the other things that we do in life. So this is these cowboys of lithography, Steve Campbell and Jack Lemmon, playing it really cool when we were in the archive, but they were so dazzled. And I had the joy of running into master printer Andy Rubin, who was the lead printer at Tandem Press for many years. He had just seen this exhibition, and he was with his friend Beauvais Lyons, another great contemporary lithographer, and they were just geeking out at this exhibition. They almost got kicked out. They had to be told 3 times by the security guard, "Back away from the prints, please," because they were getting right up close to them. Like, "Do you see? What did he do over here? How did he do that? This is different on this piece." And I think they used a stencil. So they were, doing what we do. But yeah, Steve and Jack were just dazzled.
And that archive visit was fun for me too, to see how much Jack Lemmon loved Chéret, and he would just look at something, he'd say, "I know how he did that," and it was so fun to hear a next generation professional lithographer talk about how Chéret achieved some of these effects.
Yeah, and that must be it for you as a print scholar who, is obviously your explanation of lithography was perfect, and I know you're familiar with it, but in a different way you're familiar with this process. How has your recent relationships with Jack or myself kind of influenced the way you think about this work?
It's been really important to me growing as a print scholar because I have more of an academic theoretical background, so I understand how printmaking works, but I haven't done it myself. So it's always really helpful for me to interact with people who are printmakers, and they can tell me how things were made. Sometimes it is really hard to tell in retrospect how something was done, but it's fun to hear their suppositions about how something was done. And just watching how a shop works and how effects were achieved kind of gives me more ideas about how to interpret things, because that's what I do. I learn about the history of printmaking, the context of whatever prints are being made, and then interpret that for a museum audience. But it gives me more things to think about and to pull out into those interpretations, and to not say something that's really stupid and inaccurate. So that's important too.
Which is kind of what we were used to for a lot of years as, printmaking students, listening to our art history professors kind of get things, a little bit wrong. But, it's a neglected history. And I'm so excited to see an emerging curator in this field doing an exhibition like this and actually commissioning a contemporary artist to make a work. I think that's I'm really glad that you're straddling those two worlds and bringing us together. And I hope there's more of that for the museum to come.
Yeah, I hope so too. I'd like to do more. But yeah, I think we have time to do one more question. So do you want to talk about technology or text?
Ooh. Technology or text? Oh, you just said that. The text. Who are you? Ooh, I want to talk about text.
Okay. So I think the background here is that as you saw in some of the previous slides, Chéret would make the same image with different text overlaid on top because of his reusing images for different functions. And so I think when Ericka and I were talking about the commission, we decided we wanted to do two different versions, and one would be this deluxe version for collectors and connoisseurs, and one would be one that we could put in the exhibition and one that we could put outdoors. So we decided on keeping text but using different text in the deluxe version. So I think I sent you a big file of all of these French critical responses to Chéret's work and the poster in general, translated into English, and you picked and chose what things you wanted to include in the deluxe version of the poster. And I'm really excited by the way that you use text in your work, and I think that's a little bit because I can recognize what I do in it as well, because when I'm researching an exhibition, I'm trying to put myself back in time and back into the historical mindset of the people who were living at that time. So I'm looking for texts that help me understand how people were thinking about things at a specific time. And I feel like your texts are also sort of grappling with the past or trying to help you understand what people were thinking or feeling in these situations that you're depicting. So I'm wondering if you could tell us more about how you find the texts that you use and how you want them to function in your work.
Can I change my mind and go to technology?
Yes.
No. Yeah.
You can squeeze it in there.
I might. I saw one slide go by that
Okay.
if I have time, I want to go back to, because it just punctuates this really important shift that Chéret was responsible for in graphic art that is still so significant today. The question about where does my text come from, how do I think about text, is so dear to me, and I get really excited to talk about it, but then I'd start to try to articulate it, and it becomes really difficult. Because I think it's the part of my practice where I'm the most sort of emotionally involved, or there's the most intuition coming in. There's all this planning that happens with lithography and with getting those compositions right and those silly digital mock-ups that then there's this moment where I find text from these primary source documents directly from history, and I pair them up. I'll show a couple images of that, and I pair them up with the drawings that I'm doing and the images and the technology that I'm thinking about, and it just has to look right. It has to feel right. I think that what's really awesome about, and a really big difference between the way you and I, oh, that's still about technology. Ah, bummer. That's all right. Here.
Interweave it.
Yeah, maybe it does.
Yeah. I think they're related because a lot of how you use text contrasts against that technology, where it's showing a machine and priming how you will react to it. So I think they are related.
Well, yeah, these two pieces, for example, I mean, I think in my practice, I'm interested in showing the vulnerability that's possible. You know, much of the propaganda I'm looking at uses these images of machines as these symbols for progress, these ideals of Americanness and industry and inventiveness. But then I noticed, it was actually a student that pointed it out to me, that these, I think he said about the image on the right, this looks like a chalice, which is a decidedly feminine form. And then I started looking back at this other work, realizing like, oh, this is a rocket engine. That's not like a phallic rocket. That's this thing. The shields have been taken off of it. It's vulnerable. It's dented. It's exposed. I am not projecting certitude and solidity and power, or maybe it's just a different kind of power. It looks like a big pregnant thing. And then that text can sometimes also, you know, if I'm taking it out of its original context, it's still like grandiose and magniloquent, but it's functioning in a different way because it can't connect with the message, because there isn't one, right? So it's there's this interesting interplay where I'm denuding that masculine thrust of the machines, but also not allowing the text to do what it's intended to do. But here's a bunch of quotes that are taken directly from your essay, Lithographic Monuments. The ephemerality is modern. Yeah.
That sounds right.
Yeah. And so Nikki gave this essay to me in preparation for, like while I was starting to design this work. And normally I'm going through all these primary source documents in my studio practice trying to find little snippets of things, and you had done all this work for me. It was fantastic, looking for this flowery, beautiful descriptive language, and it was all there, and it really punctuates this difference between you and I. Like, you have to give it like context. You're responsible to, you know, make us understand, whereas I'm doing the opposite, and so I'm like just cherry picking and like, ooh, I like that. I'm going to dismantle understanding. So I like that we're working together in that way. So, and then what I do once I have these quotes and a couple, like the piece on the left, or it's not a piece yet, I guess, but this was some of the text exploration I did for that landfall piece with the two men that were kind of wrestling or working or whatever they were doing. And that text is taken from, like I said, some of the Vietnam era, Lyndon Johnson's quotes, the Pentagon Papers, but then also these statements of my father's or other humans involved in that conflict. And I have to cut them out. And I don't know why, but I need to see them all together, and then I play like refrigerator magnet poetry with them. And then that's the next decisive part of all of this, is to get that, you know, that rough mock-up in Illustrator, in Adobe Illustrator, and start putting all that text in, and then I got to let it mellow for a few days and come back to it and what feels right. And that's where intuition kind of comes into my practice, and that happened with the piece that we did too. I tried a bunch of different arrangements. You know, what in the piece that we did, I think there's 3 different quotations there, but they look like they could be at least grammatically of the same thing.
And what I really love about that one is one of the things that you picked is written by somebody who's very critical of the poster. So I love that it worked its way into this thing celebrating the poster.
Yeah, which is something that I, you know, am also combining these very disparate sources in my other work. Like, you know, I landed on, you know, the beating the national heart, and then some waved and some didn't. Like these 2 very, you know, polemic works that came together. Well, I'm not going to talk about that one, but yeah, I think that you know, this has been this great inroad into history for me. I'm going to go all the way back to some charades and talk about technology for a minute too. But this inroad into history for me has been really something I try to explain to my students a lot, which I think is a really important part of artistic practice, is that we don't necessarily bring to our practice these ideas that we have sorted out and figured out, and we have just this thing to express based on whatever, you know, mystical kernels of genius we have within us. We bring questions, we bring problems, we bring tension, we bring a hope for conversations and critical thinking, and then we, you know, hopefully project that back onto you. And yeah, I've started a lot of this work with questions that I feel like I've outgrown and answered. Like, is there anything redeeming about the military-industrial complex? You know, has it brought anything positive to bear? It's not that I've answered that question. I'm just not interested in that anymore because I've read the 9/11 Commission report and the Pentagon Papers, and I'm exhausted of those questions sometimes. But I wanted to, you know, especially with this slide, kind of highlight. I'm going to jumping away from that line of thinking again. This grid that I was talking about in this, and I'm not the print scholar here, so, you know, bear with me and interrupt me if you have anything. Advertising, in the language of advertising, was, you know, it was very didactic. This is what you were buying, this was all the information about it, and here's the image of the people, you know, wearing the things or playing with their children with these things. And then what starts to happen that you can see in Chéret's career is all of a sudden he's working with a little bit less. There's less text. There's less didactic. And he's using the image and allowing the image to seduce and draw people in and just, you know, getting a little bit playful with the viewer. And I really started to notice that in the propaganda of World War I, particularly, watching in the early part of that conflict, the posters looked very much like the images on the left. And then as, you know, as Cubism and Dada and Modernism and Art Nouveau start to impregnate people's, you know, illustrators and designers' thinking, you see these posters start to change, and the language of persuasion begins to change. And I still see that when car commercial, or like commercial for a car is being advertised, they're saying nothing about the car. It's just just how sexy you're going to be when you have this car. And I think back to Chéret when I see car advertisements today, and that liberation, I think, and in this era in time when artists and advertising work together in this different ways, it's not that there's no vestiges of that, but it was, I think, a really important human moment of development and persuasion. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to end.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
Well, thank you so much. If we have some time for questions, if anybody has any. So.
It could be about lithography, legacies of print. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are you aware of Leseba? Yeah? That was the first place where I had anyone print my work for me. At Leseba Grafica is in the state of Veracruz in Mexico, and I was there as a resident artist for a month. And these people they are hardcore about all of the media and the technology in printing a lithograph, not just because they have this undying love for it, but out of necessity. Like, for them to get a brand new shiny Takish press down to the state of Veracruz in the mountains surrounded by coffee plantations is not happening. So they're making the leather rollers themselves, they're making the crayons themselves, and they've quarried, instead of getting their stones from Bavaria, they have connections with the quarry that has Mexican marble, Oaxacan marble. And it is a beauty to draw on. It's luminous, right? Like it's reflecting light in a way that's so different than Bavarian limestone, but it's harder to print too. I don't know if you did. No, I didn't. I realized I wasn't down for that. I wanted to get a few more drawings in on that yummy stone, so I had Daniel Barraza Ortiz print for me, and that freed me up. And that was my first. And I had to reckon with labor. I love labor. That's part of how I grew up here in Wisconsin, on construction sites and in manufacturing, and being directly involved in all the processes of my printing was something that was uneasy for me to let go of. But now I'm a little more comfortable with it now. But it's a gem of a shop. There's some really special people there that have brought something to Veracruz and to Mexico that it's magical. Yeah.
Did you say there are 2 posters for this exhibit? One's with fine art and the other one commercial. Could we see those 2?
I have a slide somewhere. Maybe at the end or the
I feel like it was closer to the beginning. We can do the whole.
Let's do the grid.
Yeah.
The grid.
So the design of the 2 is exactly the same, and only the text is different. And initially, I had talked with Steve Campbell about printing so one of them is intended for outdoors, so we wanted to paste a lot of these posters outside to advertise the exhibition. So that one has the name of the exhibition, the dates, the museum's name. And ideally, we would have pasted a lot of those outside and let nature people take their course on them. But as it turns out, the city of Milwaukee considers postering to be graffiti, so it ended up that I wasn't able to hire someone to just go and wheat paste these all over town, and it was a lot more one-on-one contacts with people and getting permission to paste the posters on their sites. So fortunately, while Ericka was here, we worked with MyAd and UWM to paste a few of the posters outdoors, and MyAd is going to take pictures of how they decompose over time, which will be great. So we did a little less of that than I thought, but initially I talked to Steve Campbell about printing those on thinner, less quality paper, because that's how it would have been in Chéret's time. Like these deluxe editions would have been on nicer paper, but Steve ran some tests. He didn't like how it was turning out on the thinner, lower quality paper, so we just ended up printing both editions on the same paper. So the outdoor ones, I think it kind of broke both of our hearts while we were slapping paste all over these really high quality fine art lithographs and shoving them up on the wall. But it's like, my job is to conserve prints, but this is what these are for. It's okay.
It was painful.
Yeah, and we were selling the one on the right in the store, and they sold out. So that's good. Yeah,
that's good. But I didn't think that would happen.
Or no, the one on the left.
Yeah.
The
deluxe.
Yep.
Yeah, it's funny. I thought that would be the one that I felt, represented this great in between. Like there's Chéret, and then there's my studio practice, and I'm gonna marry the 2. But I really like the one on the right. I just think the text works in the block, and from a design perspective. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to technique.
Okay.
I really love photography. The stone is gorgeous. But you showed 3 prints on the wall, and somehow silk screen came in my mind when I saw these flat surfaces, and you mentioned or talked about that.
Yeah.
I don't know if 153 Jane, I don't know if the person was on the left. You see the green of the image? It was kind of like rainbow forms. Not this one.
Oh.
It was a different series of images.
And it was one of was it Chéret's work?
No.
Oh.
Because you talked about the surface and
Yeah. The close-up of the. Oh, here. So some of, did I say screen print? I'm getting good with this computer.
But did you have a question about screen print versus lithography, or what were you thinking about in connection with that?
And use stencil sometimes for layers. Actually, a certain reason about flatness or not flatness.
Yeah.
And this one on the left there was all flat. And then you did mention anything about
Technically, I think it's frequently, a lot of people think that screen printing is flatter than lithography, and people prefer to work with lithography because of the richness of tones and the delicate tonal passages you can achieve, and just there's a thing called a touche wash, and it's try to imagine like black watercolor paint, and you can paint directly on the stone and get all of the richness of that wash to print, through that method of dampening the stone and rolling ink over it. It's really magical, and people often think of screen printing as being much flatter, and you can achieve a pretty. I'm just going to defend screen print. You can achieve a lot with screen printing. You just got to know, like what screen mesh to use and how to adjust your transparent films and how to maybe even draw directly on the screen. But it's much quicker and often used for much more graphic, quicker work. So I think we're used to seeing these very different stylistic choices made in either medium. Yeah. I'll try to keep looking for it. But any other questions?
Yeah, a stupid question. I mean, as you have mentioned, why always new? How did you decide on that?
Great question.
That's the title of the exhibition. So that I came up with, and that was based on reading all of these press clippings about Chéret's work. So I was seeing all of these references that describe the posters as éphémère, which is ephemeral in French, and then there were things that described them as like constantly renewing, always new. So I kind of did what Ericka does, where I cherry-picked the always new from these critical descriptions of Chéret's posters to give that idea of the ephemerality and how they were transforming every day. And the products were new, the posters were new, so that's where that comes from, is critical text from the time.
I think people were really excited by the pace at which things were moving. The technology that was becoming commonplace in the era, especially printing technology, that meant there was all these beautiful, posters going up every other day. I think it's a really fitting title for the exhibition, because there was this buzz and fervor around just the newness of the world, and electricity and the telegraph, and what kind of like maybe the buzz that we had when digital printing started infiltrating our media and the internet, and what are we going to do?
Yeah, I think that comes through in the way that people were reacting to these posters and the entertainment. They were always looking for the newest thing, the best thing, whatever is happening tomorrow. That's what people were interested in. So in that way, it's kind of interesting. Chéret is looking back at 18th century French art. So he kind of combines time frames where he's looking back at 18th century art, making art about his present moment, but also sort of anticipating where things are going in the future, where all these trends that started in the 19th century are continuing on and shifting forms today. So it's in the essay that I wrote for the catalog, I can think about these different timescales that he's dealing with in his work.
Good question.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, we just did the ones at MyAd and UWM this week, so they're still there. So the MyAd ones are across the street from the building on an abandoned historical building, and then the ones on the UWM campus are in the Peck School of the Arts area on some columns and on the side of the music building. So you can travel and see a little art installation. They are original ones, yeah. So we printed 300 originals, and we weren't able to do that because of the graffitiing issue. Yeah, I wish they had been everywhere, but that was the idea behind the show, but then it didn't end up playing out the way I hoped. So
In a
sometimes
different
that happens.
city with different municipal codes, we could have. Are you going to go lift one? You shouldn't. Don't do that.
Yeah.
We went over to Maya this morning, and one of the posters is ripped down across the street.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, someone saw something to it.
That's good. I really wanted that to happen because that's what would have happened in Cheret's times. People were peeling these off of the wall after they got pasted up. So I'm glad. I'm sorry for your beautiful work, but I'm glad it happened.
Well, Matt was helping us put these works up at MyAd, and was kind of cleaning up the surface a little bit and removing some of the other printed material that was there. And then later we decided, like, let's put a little bit of that up, like a little bit of that character of that, of the urban texture on this building. And I like when they're ripped down. It means somebody interacted with it. Those earlier pieces that I had wheat pasted as a graduate student, a lot of the times I'd go back to that site and people were trying to tear them off, and I wonder, did they want the artwork? Are they upset that it's there? Is this security taking it down and just giving up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
French artists from the 70s in Paris that would do this. Is it Chéret? They would tear posters off and then you make it into art.
Mark Bradford? Oh. If you remember, let us know. Yeah, that's not mine.
He would take the posters apart or the old poster and just use that as a piece of art. The posters that would overlap and came apart.
Sounds like I should know about this artist. Yeah, don't leave without remembering. Pull it out.
Yeah, show the copy a couple years ago.
You'll think of it.
Yeah, I have a question. Also technology related. Obviously, you're working in this really traditional medium, but then you're using modern technology to create mock-ups and sort of. And going back, especially to the previous slide, I think where you're showing the color kind of separation, and I think we can now digitally, obviously, sort of mimic sort of what the overprint of all the separate colors would be, and sort of get a sense beforehand. I don't know, maybe
Yes.
this could be a slide, but where you had the black film for
Yeah.
all the different colors, and sort of what back then the artists would never have seen. And I'm wondering if be able to control that more if you miss maybe a surprise effect that could happen if one would have to just separate the colors
Yes.
without understanding
Yeah.
previously how
Yes.
it would work.
I really appreciate that insight and question, because I think that I think about this a lot, especially when I'm looking at the Adobe files that I have and how fortunate I am to be able to mock these things up. Even my predecessors, who were working with printmaking in the 70s, 80s, even 90s, didn't have that ability, and I think of them constantly, like how we're in at Chéret, especially how what skill they had to be able to envision these things and then just and create them.
Obviously, there's experience enough to why you get a better sense of it. Right?
Yes, but what could I be missing out on? What if I just set Adobe down for a project? And I think that's what Jack Lemmon was really wanting me to do, was like, look at, like, you have this facility, you can draw, like, abandon all of, like, I was bringing a lot of different colors to him because my color choices were coming and influenced from that Photoshop work or that Illustrator work. And I wasn't thinking through the problems the way that Chéret would have. And it's a goal. I would like to be there. And I think of that as an instructor as well. Like, how can I prevent my students from using technology without being a Luddite? Like, where can they converge? Because such beautiful things can happen. Yeah, because I think that's remarkable. Again, if you're going to look at the exhibition again today or later this month, Chéret drew all of those different color separations on the stone, but somehow in his mind, he did what I could do with layers on Photoshop, and took that key image or that outline image and imagined what he needed to draw on the stone, the yellow stone and the red stone, and he could sense how that would look when printed. That blows my mind. Yeah.
Did you find any indication of them color proofing before they printed? I mean, trying different colors, or did he just go boom right to it?
As far as I'm aware, he did proof on hand presses before he went on to, yes.
Try this yellow, let's try that, and try that. So there was an indication that he was thinking through it in the more traditional way, where you'd actually print the colors and then say, okay, here's 4 different variations, let's go through 3, as opposed to going on to the
Yeah. And that I don't know how much he experimented with the different, yeah, I think I,
would do in the envelope.
right, a lot of the information about these posters was not preserved, or if it is preserved, it's in an archive in France that I haven't found yet. So it's, yeah, because it wasn't thought of as art at the time. So I think it is preserved in like industrial archives, but it's hard to know where to look. So there's still a lot of things that we can learn about Chéret and his technical processes.
One of the things that kept me up at night was, if you've ever, used colored pencil, paint, printmaking in any form to do human flesh, to do skin, and you've mixed the color wrong, it is a bad scene. Like if you're, if there's too much red in the face, if it's too dark, if it's too light, it kept me up at night, because I had sent these films, these drawn films with those splatters on them to BlackRock ahead of time, and I knew we didn't have time for all these colored trial proofs. Like, what if there was too much splatter in the red layer or too much in the yellow layer? Like, look at it. Like, it's like he just knew like what amount of splatter needed to happen, and that's, the most difficult thing for me to achieve was those overlapping colors with those splatters. And then when we were color proofing, which we did just a bit of down in Santa Fe, I was just watching those little chubby babies, the yellow went down. I was like, oh God, oh no, what's gonna happen with the red? What's gonna happen? And then the red layer went down, and it was, it's okay. Like I didn't have to go back and because there was no Photoshop to tell me like how this is gonna look, and no backup.
Well, with that, I think we'll end. But thank you so much for joining us. Please
Thanks,
do see the
everyone.
exhibition if you haven't yet. And thank you, Ericka, for creating such a beautiful poster for the exhibition. It's
Thank
been
you
a
for
pleasure to work with
inviting
you.
me. Yeah, it was likewise. It's been great to work together.